Krishna, dear devotees, good morning from Srila Mayapur. My name is Madhavananda Das, and we're here with our regular adventures in Srimad Bhagavatam. I presume this is working. Hare Krishna. So today we'll be speaking about, this is the 11th part of our series we're calling Meeting in Kurukshetra, although right now we're speaking about Krishna in Mathura. This is the 5th part of what happened in Mathura, and today we'll be speaking about Krishna's mercy on Kamsa. In our last session we spoke something about how Krishna killed Kamsa. Today we'll be speaking something about how Krishna simultaneously showed mercy and compassion to both Kamsa and his wives. Gora graganya gana gota goloruharam Goranga Gudatama Gopyara Kopa Briksham Gopala Gada Ratidam Yati Singha Gora Govinda Deshika Varam Satatam Namami Uttama Adama Kichuna Bachila Jachiya Dhile Kakola Kahe Premananda Emona Goranga Hridaya Dariya Bola Bhaja Goranga Kaha Goranga Laha Gorangera Namare Jai Jana Goranga Bhaje Se Hoyamara Pranare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, we heard something from the 44th chapter of the Bhagavatam in our last discussion about how Krishna killed Kamsa. And we spoke something about how, according to the Hari Vamsa Purana and also to Garga Samhita, Kamsa died by having his hair pulled. Sometimes some boys pull their hair, and the girls say, "Oh, this is very, very bad." Don't underestimate hair pulling. It killed Kamsa. And we gave some purport to that, part of which is a description of how Krishna, understanding that the residents of Mathura didn't really, they weren't sure if Kamsa was really killed or not. This is in response to Srila Prabhupada's comments in Krishna book that Kamsa was killed by Krishna's punching him. So therefore Krishna pulled his hair and dragged him across the dais to assure everyone that he's actually dead. Otherwise they were afraid if we start cheering and becoming happy, we may get in big trouble right now. But other commentators say that the reason why Krishna pulled the hair of Kamsa was because Krishna was angry. You pulled my mother Devaki's hair. You were going to kill her at the time of her wedding, so now let me pull your hair. The Gopal Campu of Jiva Goswami describes what happened at the time when Kamsa died. Shrimananda Mahasoya Dutataram Prastapayanyam Naram Gostam Kamsa Vinasa Sangsana Krite Pragad Ayam Tad Yada Tasmatari Na Kevala Shukamoya Vadyaswanastam Purim Apta Kintu Janas Chakechid Iha Yetad Yoga Padyam Yayu. That Nanda Mahashoy Drutataram prastapayam na yamnaram. He sent a message to Gostam, to Braj, to inform them that Kamsa Vinasa Sangsasana Krite, that Kamsa had been killed. And when the residents of Vrindavan heard that message, Nanda Maharaj is so kind, he's so concerned, he understands everyone's going to want to hear about this. This is really important. So he sent one of the cowherd men to Vrindavan to inform them that Krishna had died. And at that time, everyone in Vrindavan, they started doing kirtan. Harivo, 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 Shri Krishna Balarama Ke. And that joy, the sound of that joyful kirtan, Shukamoya, it's described, full of joy. Vadya Swanas, that Vadya means the musical sounds, Swanas, Tampurim, it reached Mathura. And then it said that Apta Kintu Janascha Kechiri Hatye Tad Yogarapadyam Yayu. That not only did the sound reach Mathura, that joyous kirtan of Vrindavan, but the people of Mathura, they became one with the sound of that music. In other words, they accepted, yes, this is the best thing. So this also indicates something to us about the glory of kirtan. And when kirtan is done, as described here, kevala shukamoya, it's just simply filled with happiness and joy. If you've been in some harinam like that, which is just full of joy. I remember doing kirtan sometimes with Agnidev Prabhu or some of the devotees in the Los Angeles temple and Hollywood Boulevard. And sometimes the kirtan was just so full of joy. You would see a huge crowd of people gathered around the devotees, and they were just stunned. They were just standing there with open mouths. They didn't know. These people are so weird, these Hare Krishna people. They're so happy. Yesterday, Agnidev Prabhu was making a comment how once someone asked Srila Prabhupada, they said, well, a reporter asked Prabhupada, what do you Hare Krishna people do for entertainment? Recreation, that was what it was, for recreation. And Prabhupada's reply was, Kevala Anandakanda. He said, everything we do is for recreation. Everything we do should be for recreation. But if we're doing it because it's a task, because I have to, I'm supposed to, that's not Shukamoya Kirtan, which is being described by Jiva Goswami here. But when we have that Shukamoya Kirtan, it affects people. And as described here, the residents of Mathura, they became one with that music. So similarly, when we do kirtan in a very joyous way, it touches the hearts of people and they become one. And this is real preaching. This is Brajeta Prachar, as described by Thakur Bhaktivinoda, by Krishnadas in his song Jai Radhe Jai Krishna Jai Vrindavan. Let's continue a little bit. In Srimad Bhagavatam, in the 5th chapter of the 1st canto, Srila Sanatana Goswami speaks about the mercy of Krishna. How kind Krishna is. He killed Kamsa, but he also gave liberation to Krishna. Sanatana Goswami elaborates on this. He says, Krishna Karuna Katasya tu dure Tasya Prasasya Bhatanigraho pi Kansadaya Kalaya Putanadya Baladaya Prag Api Sakshino Tra. He said that we have this kata. We speak about Krishnasya Karuna, Karunya Kata. We speak about the kindness of Krishna. He says, but tu dure, putting that aside, tu means but. You should know that Tasya prasasya bhato nigraho pi, that even the nigraha, or the punishment that Krishna gives, that's also prasasya. That's also very praiseworthy. And Sanatana Goswami gives some examples. Kamsadaya, Kamsadaya Kaliya Putanadya. He gives the example of Kamsa and Kaliya and Putana and others. And he says there's some sakshi, some witness of this. Baladaya Prag. Previously, Bali Maharaj and others, they were witness to this, to Krishna's kindness. And Sanatana Goswami, he comments on his own verse. He says, at the time of Kamsa's death, Krishna dragged him from his platform in the arena and jumped on his chest. Thus, as Kamsa left his body, while leaving his body, he says, he was able to feel Krishna's foot on his chest. And he was able to see Krishna's face. That's pretty good. To be able to have Krishna's foot on your chest when you're being killed. And to see the face of Krishna. And not only that, Sanatana Goswami points out, as we may get to today, how we may speak about in our next session also, how Krishna arranged a royal funeral, which is attended by all the Yadu dynasties, all the cowherd men of Vrindavan, and Krishna himself. It's very auspicious. Not only did he arrange a funeral, but he made arrangements that all the members of the Yadu dynasty came there, and not just that, but the Brij Basis, the cowherd boys and Nanda Maharaj, they also attended like that. And Sanatana Goswami says that Krishna, furthermore, he began to console Kamsa's widows. And then he gave the vacant throne to Ugrasena. And Krishna punished Kamsa, but he also punished many of the chelas or followers of Kamsa, including the wrestlers and different kings like Jarasandha. And Sanatana Goswami says there was only the worst of those enemies of the Lord. And he gives examples of Sishupal and Dantavakra, who failed to obtain his first full mercy of Krishna. Now what does that mean? They didn't get the full mercy of Krishna. He says that because these two demons displeased Krishna because they did some offense against the Brahmins. But also because actually they were Krishna's eternal servants in the end. They were Krishna's eternal servants. So in the end, they also received his mercy. So initially, Sishupal and Dantavakra didn't, but because they were Krishna's eternal servants in the spiritual world, eventually they got the complete mercy of Krishna. And he goes on to describe how Chanura and Mushtika, they didn't have as much fault as Kamsa. They were fighting against Krishna on the orders of Kamsa. And because of that, they'd been infected by this envious spirit of Kamsa. Just like if we associate with envious persons who criticize devotees, we may also become infected by that disease. But still, he says those wrestlers were allowed to enjoy the wonderful thing of being embraced by Krishna during combat. The ladies of Mathura were watching and saying, how is this? They're getting to be embraced by Krishna. I'd like to be embraced by Krishna. And Sanatana Goswami says, just like the cowherd boys of Braj and the gopis of Vrindavan, they got to embrace Krishna, the cowherd boys, when they were mock fighting with Krishna. And he says that Krishna also gave honor to the wrestlers by conducting their funerals. It's an amazing thing. In the Gita in chapter 9, Krishna says a very important verse, Samoham sarvabhuteshu name dveshusti na priya ibhajanti tamam bhaktya maite teshu chapyaham. He says, Samoham sarvabhuteshu. I'm equal to everyone. Name dvesha. I'm not hateful to anybody. Stina priya. No one's particularly dear to me either. And in his commentary on this verse, in his Sarta Bharshani commentary, he says that, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that Krishna is like a Kopa-briksha tree, which gives everybody whatever they desire without any discrimination. But then Vishwanath also comments, on Krishna's phrase here. He says, Ye bhajanti, but, ye bhajanti, tumam bhaktya. But those persons who are my devotees, mayi te teshu chapyaham. Those persons, they're my friends. And I am, they're in me, and I'm also in them. So Vishwanath says that if you compare Krishna to a kopa briksha tree, it's not actually appropriate. Because although the kopa briksha tree is equal to everyone, like Krishna, and the kopa briksha tree gives whatever people desire without any discrimination to everyone, but Krishna, he says, those people who take shelter of that tree, they don't become attached to it without any desire for the fruit. There's a particular reason they're taking shelter of that tree. They want something. But in the case of Krishna's devotees, they don't want anything from Krishna. And he goes on, he said this example of the kopa briksha tree and the followers of the kopa briksha tree is also not appropriate with Krishna and his devotees, because the kopa briksha tree doesn't become attached to whoever takes shelter of it. Nor does it hate the enemies of those who take shelter of it. But Krishna kills with his own hands the enemies of his devotee, like Kamsa. And Krishna in the Bhagavatam, he tells Prahlad Maharaj, Praradaya yadadru yadanishepi virojitam. He says, you don't worry, I'm going to kill Hiranyakashipu immediately, in spite of the benedictions that the Lord Brahma has given him. So Krishna, sometimes people say that Krishna is partial to his devotees, that he's partial to the members of the Yadu dynasty and the Nanda Maharaj, and he was more favorable to them than he was to Kamsa. But Krishna is equal to everyone, and however people approach him, he reciprocates in a similar way. But at the same time, Krishna is partial to his devotees. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that partiality is not a fault, rather it's an ornament. It's a glory of Krishna. So the Hari Vamsa Purana describes that what's said there is Kamsa Yoshitam Vilapa. The Yoshita means the wives, or the Vilap, the lamentation of Krishna's wives. And this is also expressed in the Garga Samhita, where it said, Tadayancha uro hastayar asti praptya dayastriya vinir gatastu rurudurjata vaidyavya dukitaha. That at that time, Asti and Prapti, the two daughters of Jarasandha, who were married to Kamsa, and as we described previously, these are the wives of mundane religion. Asti meaning everything is okay if you just become a member of our religion. And Prapti meaning to obtain something. These are the goals of mundane religion. Now I'm a member of the religion. I don't have to worry about everything. I'm going to get liberation. I'm going to get whatever. In Prapti, I'm going to get whatever I want in terms of money or a nice husband, a nice wife. So these wives of Kamsa, Tadayantya means that they started beating Ura, their chests. And Ruruda, they started crying. Jata Vaidyava Dukita, they were full of all types of grief. Gopal Campu also speaks about this, and as well as the Hari Vamsa Purana. I won't go so much in the Hari Vamsa Purana, but the Gopal Campu, it says that Swasapatyangam Alisha, that Kamsa's wives, they embraced their husband, and Mritta Priyatayana Sanghita Sanghanana Kriyatam. They became like they were lifeless. And they started banging their foreheads and their chests with their fists. They embraced their husband in this way. And it's said that prana rodanam, they became angry, they became hateful to their own life heirs. In other words, why are we still alive? And kurvana rodanam vijahus tatatan. They began to wail and cry. And Mathura Shakataram, their mothers also lamented. Because the mother laments when she sees her daughter, if the husband of the daughter is dead, then the mother of the daughter also begins to lament, oh, what will happen to my daughter now? Who will protect her? Will she have to get married again and lose her good reputation? So now they begin to lament in this way. And at the same time, Krishna, seeing their cries, Krishna felt remorse, and he began to criticize himself and speak sweet words to them. And it's said in Gopal Campu that although Krishna consoled them, those ladies wouldn't accept his consolation. And so then the Yadava, members of the Yadava dynasty, they engaged others in consoling those ladies. And then they took Krishna into the city. And we'll speak more about that later. But today I want to speak something about Krishna's kindness and how Krishna and the Vaishnavas, they speak in a sweet way, even to people who offend them. Rupa Goswami defines Priyam Vada. Priyam Vada, Vada means speech, and Priya means sweet speech. As Jani Krita Paradhe, Pi Sanfavadi Priyam Vada. Speaking Priyam Vada, he says, means to speak in such a way even to people who have offended you. The wives of Kamsa, Asti and Prapti, the daughters of Jarasandha, were very critical of Krishna. They were very angry with Krishna. But still, Krishna spoke with them in a very gentle, sweet way. Still, Krishna felt remorse and criticized himself. Rupa Goswami in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he gives an example of what is Priyam Vada, what is speaking in a pleasing way, even to someone who's offended you. And he says the example is Krishna's dealings with Kaliya. Krite vyalike pi na kundalindra tvaya videya mai dosha dristi pravashyamanosi surachitanam param hitaya jagavam kulashya. Krishna sent Kaliya out. He said, hey, Chalo, get out of here. Go away. You're not welcome in Vrindavan. Thakur Bhaktivinoda comments in one place, he says that the reason why Krishna drove Kaliya out, although he gave so much mercy to Kaliya, Sanatana Goswami says, it says in Bhagavatam that Krishna danced. He put his feet on the heads of Kaliya. And Sanatana Goswami says not only that, he brought the gopis on the heads of Kaliya and he started doing Ras Leela. That's pretty good. It's pretty good if you could get Krishna's feet on your head. Much better if you can get the feet of the gopis and Radharani on your head. But what to speak if you get both of them at the same time when they're doing a Ras Leela on your head? Kaliya really got a lot of mercy. But Krishna told him, get out of here. How is that mercy? Bhaktivinoda comments that the reason why Kaliya couldn't stay is because although he got a lot of mercy, Kaliya didn't take shelter of any of the Brij Basis. And we also have given some other further explanations. I won't go in that direction right now. But Krishna, when he drove Kaliya out, Rupa Goswami said that Krishna spoke to Kaliya in a very sweet way. He said, my dear Kaliya, you're the king of snakes. He says, Tvai videya mai dosha dristi. Although I've caused you so much suffering, please don't find any dosha. He says, mai dosha dristi. Please don't find fault in me. He said, you should understand, I had to do this because for the good of the cows. You can't stay here because you're going to hurt the cows, and I take care of the cows. So Krishna spoke in a sweet way to Kaliya. That's the nature of Krishna. That's the nature of the Vaishnavas. The Bhagavatam, 10th canto, chapter 44, toward the end of the chapter, after the killing of Kamsa, Shukadev Goswami describes Raja Yosita Asvasya Bhagaval Lokabhavana Yamahur Lokikam Samstam Hatanam Samakarayat. He uses the word of asvasya, which means to console. And how Krishna, Yosita asvasya, he began to console the wives of Kamsa. And not only that, but then Krishna, Loki Kim Samstam, he arranged for the funeral ceremony for Kamsa. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur comments on this verse in Sarta Darshani. He says that Krishna was telling the wives, "O wives of Kamsa, don't feel bad. Today you've met with great misfortune, but don't feel bad. I'm obligated to protect you. So why should you worry?" They're the daughters of Jarasandha. They're criticizing Krishna. They're the wives of Kamsa. But still Krishna is saying, I'm obliged to protect you. Several things we can understand from this, from the commentaries of our acaryas. One is that it's the obligation for men to protect women. Not to put them down, not to try to control them or say, oh, you're lesser than us, but with love and affection to protect them. That's Vedic culture. And Krishna here, he's showing Vedic culture means I have to protect the wives of Kamsa because I killed him. So now it's my obligation to protect them. In Brihad Vaishnav Toshani, Sanatana Goswami says that, gives some little details, that it was Krishna's responsibility to burn the bodies of Kamsa and Chanura and Mustika. He says even though those rituals were just external, because all the funeral rites were covered by their attaining of Krishna. They got liberation. The Vishnu Purana describes similarly, Bahu prakaram asvasta paschat tapaturo hari ta samavashayam asa swayam ashravi lekshana. That Krishna, when he saw the lamentation of those ladies, tapaturo hari, Krishna hari, he became afflicted, tapa, by their suffering. And then with tears in his eyes, the Vishnu Purana says, Krishna began to comfort those ladies. This is Vedic culture. In the demoniac culture, if someone is subordinate to you, as in the Bible it says that God gave man dominion over all the creatures on the earth, and demoniac persons interpret that to mean that now we can kill them and eat their bodies. Similarly, demoniac people, they interpret the instructions in Manu Samhita that men should protect women to mean that now we should exploit them and we should be abusive to them and be harsh with them. But the same Manu Samhita describes that that place where the women are not honored properly, not given proper respect, none of the religious acts in that community are successful if those ladies are not given respect. So we see here with Krishna, Krishna is behaving like this. He's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He just gave liberation to Kamsa, but with tears in his eyes. He's comforting Kamsa's wives. The Hari Vamsa Purana describes Kamsa narir pralapam shashutvak sukarunan bahun gahamanas tatna manam astasmin yadava sangsadi aho mayati balyena nada rosanuvartina vaidavyam stri sahasranam Kamsa shasha krite kritam. It describes the words of Krishna at that time when he saw the miserable lamentation of Kamsa's wives. Krishna began to criticize himself and that assembly, the members of the Yadu dynasty. In other words, he's there, Yadava Sangsadi, all the members of the Yadu dynasty there, they're all Krishna's followers. Krishna's their hero. And Krishna began to speak in a harsh way about himself in front of them. Who wants to speak in a harsh way about yourself in front of your followers? But Krishna's doing like this. And Krishna said, "Oh, mayata balyena nara rosana vartina," because of my foolishness, influenced by some rosha, some nara rosha, some human anger, I've made Vaidavyam Stri Sahasranam Kamsa Shashat Kritam Kritam. He doesn't just speak about Asti and Prapti, who are the prominent wives, but he says Stri Sahasranam Kamsa Krite. The 1,000 wives of Kamsa. Kamsa was a very prolific personality. He liked ladies very much. He had 1,000 wives who all became widows. And Krishna was condemning himself. And then the Hari Vamsa Purana says, Sanito Yamunatiram Uttaram. That Krishna performed the funeral rites for Kamsa on the bank of the Jamuna. And he did that, the Hari Vamsa Purana says, that first of all, in order to stop the lamentation of the women, don't feel so bad. He said, Krishna told them, your husband, he's gotten the proper funeral rites and things. And Krishna did it on the bank of the Jamuna. He did it in Braj. But he did it on the northern bank. Sanito Jamuna Tiram Uttam. Uttara means the northern side. Why is that? That northern side was away from Vrindavan. And Hari Vamsa Purana explains because he wanted to maintain the purity of the holy places. So Krishna's accomplishing two things at once. He's pacifying the ladies. He's doing several things. He's burning Kamsa's body within Braj. It's very good. But not just anywhere in Braj. On the northern bank of the Jamuna River, away from Vrindavan. So this is the nature of Krishna. This is the nature of devotees. Krishna had mercy on Kamsa. Krishna forgave Kamsa. Prabhupada wrote in a letter in 1973, he said, even if a devotee commits the most abominable actions, he's to be considered saintly because he's properly situated. As you will say, Prabhupada comments, to err is human. So in the neophyte stage, we may always expect some discrepancies are there. Kindly see things in this light and forgive their small mistakes. The big thing is that they've given their life and everything to Krishna. That's never a mistake. So Prabhupada also wanted the devotees to also develop a similar mood with each other and forgive and tolerate. If we don't do that, how will this mission for Srila Prabhupada go on? Prabhupada wrote another letter earlier in 1968, and he was saying there, he wrote, I'm glad to learn that your cooperation for this society is appreciated by the authorities. In other words, the temple authorities are appreciating how you're cooperating. We should learn to forget and forgive minor incidents. Because whenever there are two men in a place, and I think that means women also, whenever there are two men in a place, there was always some misunderstanding. So that's the example given is Krishna. That Krishna is so kind, so forgiving. He forgives Kamsa and he speaks sweet words to the wives of Kamsa. Another lesson we can get from all of this is that Krishna is non-sectarian. Krishna is not saying, I don't like Kamsa because he's not a member, he's not a Brijbasi, or because he was against me. But Krishna had some forgiveness. He was kind to him. Whereas we see in a contrary way, the wives of Kamsa, Asti and Prapya, they're being described in the Hari Vamsa Purana, that they became angry with Krishna. And they wouldn't accept Krishna's sweet words. Why is that? This is the fault of sectarianism. They're thinking, Krishna is my enemy. But for a devotee, really no one is the enemy of a devotee. The Bhagavatam describes that the only enemy of a devotee is the devotee's mind. Prabhupada says a similar thing in one conversation in Mumbai. He said the only enemy of a devotee is a devotee's rascal mind. There is no enemy. And if we cultivate that attitude, then we can cultivate bhakti. This is the nature of our movement. We're not Democrats or Republicans. We're not liberals or conservatives. We want to be Vaishnavas. And Krishna is Samoham Sarva Bhuteshu. The devotees are also equal to everyone. When Srila Prabhupada in 1968 appealed to the Governor General of Canada, whose name was Ronald Michener, Prabhupada wrote him a letter, and in that letter he described what is ISKCON. And I'd like to read you a little something from Prabhupada's description of what is ISKCON. Prabhupada says, ISKCON, the International Society of Krishna Consciousness, is a non-lucrative organization, we're not here to make money, whose purpose is to promote the well-being of human society by drawing its attention to God. We are a non-sectarian society, and our members include people from Christian, Jewish, and Muslim, as well as Hindu faiths. And Prabhupada says they can keep, members of ISKCON can retain, they can keep their own respective religious faiths. In other words, you can be a Muslim and be an ISKCON devotee. You can be a Jew, you can be a Christian and be an ISKCON devotee. And keep your particular religious faith that you grew up in. No problem. Our purpose is not to change other people in this way. Rather, the devotees of ISKCON, they're meant to have a non-sectarian mood. Thakur Bhaktivinoda speaks about the sectarianism. I often read this, one of my favorite quotes from Bhaktivinoda. In his introduction to Krishna Samhita, Bhaktivinoda says there, sectarianism is a natural byproduct of the absolute truth. Wow. Just like stool is a natural byproduct of prasadam. Prasadam's a very nice thing, but stool also comes from prasadam. I'm sorry, it's a gross example, but it's a fact. So in a similar way, the absolute truth is very wonderful, but when that absolute truth comes, sectarianism is a natural byproduct of it, just as stool is a natural byproduct of prasadam. Bhaktivinoda goes, he didn't say this about stool, that's my comment. Bhaktivinoda goes on to say that when the acaryas first speak about, they first give the absolute truth, there's no sectarianism. Because they're ready to give it to everybody. They have no followers at that time. But when they get followers, then some problems happen. And Bhaktivinoda explains, he says, the rules and regulations received through disciplic succession regarding the goal and method of achieving it are changed in due course of time according to the mentality and locale of the people. And he says a rule that's followed by one society is not necessarily accepted in another. That's why one community is different from another. And he says as the community develops more respect and appreciation for its own standards, it develops hatred toward other communities and considers their standards inferior. And this is how sectarianism comes up. But those saintly persons, those acharyas who first came to distribute a book, to give someone spiritual life, they didn't come when they're standing on the street and say, oh, I like you, I don't like you, I like the color of your skin, I like your gender, I don't like the color of your skin, I don't like your gender, I'm going to pick you, I'm not going to pick you. They're samoham sarva bhuteshu, they're equal to everyone. But the problem comes when they start getting followers. And when you get those followers, then they have to make rules and regulations. And the expert acharya sees this is what's good for you. I've heard, I don't know how much truth there is in this, but I've heard, it's a good example, whether it's absolutely true or not, historically, but I've heard that when Prophet Muhammad began preaching to those people living in the desert, one of the first instructions he gave them was, don't have sex with camels. Well, that's an important instruction. It's really disgusting to have sex with a camel. I don't know anybody who's ever tried that, but it sounds really, really disgusting. Well, that's what we've heard. I'm sorry. My wife's protesting. But apparently at that time and in that place, that was an important instruction for them. But this may not be an important instruction for the devotees in Mayapur. I really hope not. Or in other places. And someone may develop some hatred. Why should you develop hatred for that instruction? That's an important instruction for a particular community at a particular time. So Bhaktivinoda speaks like this. Again, Bhaktivinoda in his Chaitanya Sikshamrita, he speaks about the fault of this sectarian prejudice. He says, to be controlled by prejudice causes many problems. From prejudice comes partiality. And from partiality comes disrespect for truth. And Bhaktivinoda explains that wearing the signs of a Vaishnava is one of the methods of cultivating devotion involving the body. We have certain signs. We wear tilak. We have neck beads. In our society, the followers of Srila Prabhupada wear dhotis and saris. And we do that to please Srila Prabhupada. And that's part of the way we cultivate devotion. And that's involving the body. But Bhaktivinoda says, but if you think wearing a sari, wearing tilak or kunti mala, that means that someone's a Vaishnava, and someone who doesn't wear that is not a Vaishnava. Bhaktivinoda says that's prejudice arising from sectarianism. And he says if such a person becomes controlled by such false beliefs, it's not really true. Because there's so many people who don't wear a dhoti, who don't wear neck beads maybe even, or kunti mala, but they may be devotees of Krishna. And Bhaktivinoda says if you're controlled by such false beliefs, a person may not respect a real Vaishnava who's wearing those marks. And he says if you have such prejudice, and then you can't find good association within your own group, then you're not going to look to find good association elsewhere. You see, I have this prejudice. I hear in our community, amongst our devotees, our ISKCON devotees, or our Gaudiya Math devotees, or whatever, within the particular sangha that you have, you don't appreciate because they're not wearing a dhoti or sari, they're not wearing tilak. I can't give them respect. There's no good association here. And Bhaktivinoda says if he has such prejudice, then the next thing will happen, if he can't find good association in his own group, then he won't look for it elsewhere. Oh, there's no good association whatsoever in ISKCON. Some people think like that. And then Bhaktivinoda says, such a devotee falls into a dangerous position. And he says similarly, some people, they have attachment to the system of varnashram due to some prejudice. And he says they also won't get a taste. They won't get ruchi for higher bhakti. And he says, moreover, hatred also sometimes appears, and that hatred degrades the person even more. So this is the wonderful quality we're hearing in this pastime of Krishna. That Krishna, he had affection for Kamsa. He called for the Brijbasis to take part, the Brijbasis who were there in Mathura, Nanda Maharaj and the cowherd boys. He called for them to take part in Kamsa's funeral. And Krishna spoke sweet words to the wives of Kamsa. And even though they didn't appreciate him, even though they were sectarian, they couldn't get over their sectarian hatred to appreciate Krishna's sweet words. But Krishna, he spoke sweet words to them. So this is the nature of a Vaishnava. If we have hatred for someone because they're a Muslim, or because they're a Democrat or Republican, or because even they have the great fault of being born in Russia, or because they're a woman, or even worse, they're a beautiful woman. If we hate such persons, we won't have, Bhaktivinoda says, you won't get a taste for a higher level of bhakti. You may have some kind of bhakti, but you won't be able to go to a higher level. And this hatred sometimes appears in the heart then of such a person. And we can't advance then in bhakti. Therefore, Bhaktivinoda says also in his book, Sri Chaitanya, His Life and Precepts, he says that party spirit and sectarianism are two great enemies of progress. They're enemies of our own personal progress in spiritual life. And they're also enemies of the progress of the movement of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. They're also enemies of the progress of the movement of Srila Prabhupada. And if we think that we tell people, oh, you want to join the Hare Krishna movement, now you have to give up being a Christian, give up being a Buddhist, give up being a Muslim, and those things, those practices, the philosophy, it's all nonsense, it's all bogus. If we criticize like that, that may hamper, it may hinder the progress of Srila Prabhupada's movement. So we should learn some lessons from this episode of Krishna and how he dealt with Kamsa, how he dealt with the wives of Kamsa. And we should give up this sectarianism, which is a great obstacle in the progress of this movement. So I'd like to stop there, and I want to invite any of the devotees who are online to offer any comments or reflections, whatever it is you're walking away with today. And we'll be back again. Today is Wednesday. We'll be back again on Friday. And then we're going to speak something about how Krishna met Vasudeva and Devaki. I should say Devaki Vasudeva, because Shastra says you should say the name of the wife first, because the mother, the wife, is more respected than the husband or the father. So we'll speak something about how Krishna met Devaki Vasudeva from the Hari Vamsa Purana and from different literatures. So now, again, I'd like to ask the devotees if they have any reflection. Shamrup Prabhu from Boston, it must be really early, late at night there. Nice to see you, Prabhuji. Natalia's here from Estonia, and Brajabanita's there. Raghava Panditji, Hare Krishna Prabhu, I'm thinking so much about you. I'm meditating very deeply. We have some things to discuss. Mahendra Prabhu, nice to see you. Naveen. Oh my gosh, Hare Krishna. So many devotees here today. Kamala Radha, Leela Avatar Mataji. Leela Avatar Mataji's commented, there are so many problems in the past of so many devotees that sometimes it's very difficult for them to forgive and forget. Well, forgiveness, let me address this point as she's making here. Forgiveness is both individual and is both social. And we may forgive someone as an individual. Krishna may have forgiven Kamsa, but it doesn't take away the trauma that Kamsa may have caused in the lives of so many devotees. And it doesn't mean that Krishna wouldn't acknowledge that trauma, that suffering that other devotees had. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that Krishna as an individual can't forgive him. It's a difficult thing when we speak about forgiveness of devotees as a society. Part of the problem is because we're just at the beginning of our society. We have an institution, but that's not the same as a community. We have some adherence to each other. We have some similarity in the Srila Prabhupada's teachings, but there's still a big discrepancy in so many ways between the understandings of the devotees in our movement. And sometimes I may be able to forgive someone, but that same person who abused someone else, who hurt someone else, that person's not able to forgive them. And we should acknowledge that. You may be able to forgive someone, but if you see that person hurt someone else, you should acknowledge the hurt they feel. But it doesn't mean you can't forgive the perpetrator of that thing. But at the same time, just because you can forgive them doesn't mean you have to expect everybody else to forgive them. So forgiveness can be a complicated thing. A society may forgive someone. They may put them in prison. And they may say, okay, now after 20 years, we've forgiven you, and now you can... They may even help them to get a job when they get out of prison. But if that person murdered my friend or did some terrible thing to me, doesn't mean that I have to forgive them. So forgiveness is an individual thing, and it's also a social thing. And we don't have to agree with the social forgiveness or the social condemnation. It's a little complicated. Madhupati Prabhu has also commented there, how can someone avoid being inimical toward ex-members of ISKCON who actively seek the detriment of our movement? Wow, what a deep question. Thank you, Madhupati Prabhu. Krishna Kun, can you come here a second? Just come here. So Madhupati Prabhu is saying, how can we avoid being inimical toward ex-members of ISKCON who actively seek the detriment of our movement? Well, we can be happy. Oh, this person, they helped Srila Prabhupada. They chanted Hare Krishna for 2 days or 2 hours before they became inimical and angry. We can see that good in them. But at the same time, Durteki Dandavat, I keep my distance from them because they're nasty. They may be an angry person. So I can't associate with such a person. And even if I'm an ISKCON leader, I may have to ask that person, I may tell them, you're not allowed to come to our temple. Or even I may feel the need or the necessity in public to chastise or disagree with that person or smash them if I'm an ISKCON leader. I'm not such an ISKCON leader, but in some ways, if we're preaching, we have some obligations sometimes to point something out, but then we hate the sin and not the sinner. At least we should be as good as the Christians. I remember some years ago reading a terrible, terrible thing that happened in one Amish community. There was some crazy guy who used to deliver milk or pick up milk, something. He had some connection with the Amish community. I think actually he was a carpenter or something. And anyway, one day he went crazy. And he went to the Amish community, and he went inside the school where all the small children were. And he took a gun, and he made them all line up, the teachers and all the children line up against the wall. And then he locked the doors, and he killed all those children in the community. Can you imagine when the parents, how they felt when they get this news? Your children and your children's friends, your friends' children were all slaughtered by this person. And then that person committed suicide or something. And what happened a week after that, that whole community raised up donations to reach out to the wife of the person who murdered their children because she needed help. And they went to her and they said, we forgive you. We forgive your husband. We understand he had some mental illness. Can you imagine? What kind of forgiveness? And when I read that, I thought, oh my God, can we forgive in such a way? That person should be damned to hell. We'll never forgive them. We hate them forever. And I thought, I can learn from them. So at the same time, they're obviously not going to invite such a criminal into their community. And they may have to even chastise or distance themselves. But that forgiveness is there. And it's a very, very important thing. Kamala Radha, nice to see you. She's commented, yes, we should hate the sin and not the sinner. And Omkar Prabhu has commented, what does it mean that we can retain our faith while joining ISKCON? Well, I speak about this quite often. There's a number of examples I give. I'll just give one. When we first went to give classes in Uzbekistan, it's a difficult country because it's a predominantly Islamic country. And it's the first time I'd ever given classes in such a place. And different people were coming to the classes. And there was one lady who was coming every day to our classes, and she was wearing a burqa. And it was a little strange for me because I'd never given class in front of somebody with a burqa, especially they were coming every day. And later I asked one of the devotees, who is this lady wearing a burqa like this? And they told me she's a local person, and she's born in a Muslim family, and she does her namaz, 5 times a day, whatever her Islamic rules, bowing down to Mecca and reciting the prayers. She strictly does those. And she also chants 16 rounds a day. And I was a little, how is that? She's doing both things. And they further explained to me, said, well, you should understand, she can't give up her Islamic faith because if she does, they'll kill her. Mm-hmm. So she's doing her namaz, and what's the problem? Is it bad to bow down toward Mecca? We should bow down to everyone and before everywhere. And what to speak, she has some religious principles that she learned in her family. She's bowing down not just to Mecca, but she's bowing down to her tradition. She's showing appreciation to her family and the good qualities and things that she's learned. So we should keep that. Those are good things. I learned so many good things from my parents. I learned many good things from the Christian faith that I grew up with. Should I give them all up? Now that I become such an advanced person, I'm wearing tilak and I'm a so-called devotee. Huh? We can keep those things. They're good things. We should appreciate. We should appreciate our parents. But my parents are meat eaters. My parents, they're not devotees. Well, didn't they give birth to you? Didn't your mother clean your stool when you were a baby? Didn't she feed you? Do you not have any sense of gratitude? She helped you to become a devotee. Didn't you learn anything from them? If we can't remember where we came from, if we can't appreciate the good things that people have given us because they're not devotees, how are we going to make advancement? Huh? So I want to thank everybody very much. And Havi Prabhu, you're embarrassing me. Havi Prabhu is taking part here. Havi, you're very, very dear. We're always hearing your recordings and feeling so much appreciation for you. So anybody here, we're going to stop now. Anapayani, you have a reflection. Krishna Kun has a reflection, okay? Speak loudly right into the space ball there.
Hare Krishna, is this audible?
Seshadev is here today also. Hare Krishna.
Shesha Prabhu, Hare Krishna. So, thank you very much for this beautiful description, especially about Priyamvada's speech. This sweet speech of Krishna, even towards Kamsa's wives, and how he's telling Asti and Prapti, the wives of mundane religion, that I am obliged to protect you, and how the Vishnu Purana describes that with tears in his eyes, he's comforting those ladies. And it reminded me of the description in Srimad Bhagavatam of when Krishna, actually not Krishna, when Lord Narayan welcomes Gopakumar. Of course, Krishna welcomes Gopakumar with a huge embrace and by fainting in Vrindavan. But even when he arrived to Vaikuntha, Krishna told him, "Welcome, welcome, my dear boy. I am fortunate, most fortunate to meet you here. For so long I have been eager to see you. My dear friend, you have passed many lifetimes without paying any attention to me at all. For so long, listen, hope had me dancing like a fool, thinking perhaps in this lifetime, or in this, or this, or this, he will finally turn his face towards me. But I could find no pretext on which to bring you to my abode, dear brother, and still follow the timeless laws that I myself have created."
Yeah, and then Brihad Bhagavatamrita goes on to explain that Krishna tells me, he said, "Therefore I broke the rules and I personally came as your guru, Jayanta."
Thank you for adding that.
I came as your guru. Omkar Prabhu has a question here. Some principles, speaking again about the previous question, that how can we practice our previous religion while being a member of ISKCON? He says, some principles may be against Vedic injunctions. What about that? Well, we don't follow that. In Islam, there's a festival. I remember Hari Krishna when we were staying in there's a day where they kill cows as they have a big festival. Obviously, we can't do something like that. But we don't necessarily argue against them, but we don't follow that principle. And we can understand that that's something added by some person. That we don't accept that as a religious principle. Kamala Radha has further comment. I just want to say, I pray that all of you and your Sangha are healing fast and feeling better more and more every day. Well, when we see your beautiful face, Kamala Radha, with the mask on, the picture there, and we think about you, we become very, very happy. And we remember Naranjan Maharaj and how he's given mercy to you and so many devotees, and it touches our heart. Thank you very much for taking part in this today. Anna Papapayani. Anything? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and stop there today, and we will return again on Friday, and we want to hear about how Krishna met with Devaki and Vasudeva and what happened and what he spoke with him. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Samaveda Bhakta Binda ki jai, Gopremanandi.